I'm not Keith DeCandido, and welcome back to the Chronic Rift. Tonight we're going to talk about science fiction and fantasy from the female point of view, and see what's being done about their portrayal in the genre. But first, a few notes. The fall brings the debut of Captain Planet and the Planeteers on TBS. Ted Turner devised this cartoon with an ecological viewpoint in mind. While Captain Planet and his team battle the bad guys, they bring out all the important things about being environmentally sound and the dangers of being bad to the environment. Voices for this show are being done by the talents of none other than Whoopi Goldberg and Ed Asner.
It's worse than I thought. Earth is dying. I need young people to help now. Starting with 5 very special kids from 5 corners of the globe.
Powers combined, they summon Earth's greatest champion, Captain Planet. Go Planet! Spills and air pollution by encouraging your family not to waste gasoline and other fuels.
Turn off your lights in your house when you don't need them. If you can carpool, do it.
Better yet, if you're only going a short distance, walk or ride a bike.
It's healthier for you and our planet, so don't be a greedly. The power is yours!
Our book note this week is this month's release of the 2nd volume of The Women Who Walk Through Fire, Women's Fantasy and Science Fiction. Edited by Susanna J. Sturgis, this volume contains works by J. L. Camo, Deborah H. Fruin, Rachel Pollack, and 13 others. Some of the works have not even been published before. It can be found in hardback and paperback and is being released by none other than Crossing Press. And now it's time for Memorable Moments. This week's has been suggested by our floor director, Judith Goodman. Not to be confused with me, Judy Fenari, although there's nothing wrong with being Judy Goodman. In fact, our producer likes her a whole lot. Remember, any suggestions, send us to us here at The Rift.
Which I have. You are wonderful.
Thank you. I've worked hard to become so.
I admit it, you are better than I am.
Then why are you smiling?
Because I know something you don't know.
And what is that?
I am not left-handed.
You're amazing.
I ought to be after 20 years.
Oh, there's something I ought to tell you. Tell me. I'm not left-handed either.
Who are you?
No one of consequence.
I must know.
Get used to disappointment.
Okay.
And now it's time for the story of a quack who's gone to the dogs. Here's the real Keith DeCandido and this week's comic art commentary. Hi, Keith.
Hi. Hi. I'm not Judy Fernari, but I am Keith DeCandido, critic for the Comics Journal. This is Comic Art Commentary, featuring all kinds of neat stuff in the funny book field. For good or ill, and it's too soon yet really to tell which it is, comics are hip right now. With Warren Beatty's high-grossing movie version of Dick Tracy as the latest example, we will be soon seeing many comic-related items on both the big and small screen. Hollywood has always been very good at wind-sniffing. Just as the success of Bull Durham brought a deluge of baseball movies, and the success of Star Wars brought a slew of special effects-drenched science fiction films, so it seems, will the success of last year's Batman bring more and more funny books onto the screen. However, Bull Durham did not originate the baseball movie, Star Wars was not the first science fiction film, and there have been comic book characters portrayed by real actors for almost as long as there have been comic books. DC Comics had the most success in bringing their costumed heroes to life. Superman was the subject of 2 movie serials starring Kirk Alyn and Noel Neill in the 1940s, a TV show and film starring George Reeves in the 50s, and 4 films starring Christopher Reeve and Gene Hackman in the 1980s. In honor of Superman's recent 50th anniversary, a syndicated Superboy series was produced. The show now stars Gerard Christopher and is one of the most successful syndicated dramatic series presently on the air. A 5th Superman movie is being planned, but without Reeve in the title role, although he is considering directing this film. Batman's screen history is similar. He had a movie serial starring Robert Lowry and John Duncan, loved them floppy ears, an immensely popular film and TV show starring Adam West and Burt Ward, and of course, the 1989 blockbuster starring Michael Keaton and Jack Nicholson. A 2nd film with Keaton is in the works, and Sam Hamm, who scripted the first movie, will return to script this one. Other DC heroes, interpreted into the live-action format, were Captain Marvel, the most sophisticated of the movie serials technically speaking, as Captain Marvel could actually fly, plus the Wonder Woman TV show starring Linda Carter, and movies and a TV show featuring Swamp Thing. There is also a Watchmen movie being planned, directed by Terry Gilliam, presently in search of a studio. The names of Kenneth Branagh, Sean Connery, Mel Gibson, and Arnold Schwarzenegger have all been tossed around as possible stars, and Sam Hamm will be writing the script for this also. This fall, CBS has a Flash series in production, starring John Wesley Shipp and Amanda Pays, due to debut this September. Marvel Comics' success has been basically non-existent, with one exception. The Incredible Hulk, starring Bill Bixby and Lou Ferrigno, was a successful and rather good, if uneven, series. It has since mutated into a series of 3 equally uneven TV movies. The first 2 of these served as pilots of sorts for 2 other Marvel characters. The first, The Return of the Incredible Hulk, featured the mighty Thor, making his first appearance rather spectacularly in this scene. The Trial of the Incredible Hulk featured Daredevil. He's the one in the mask. Neither of these has made it past the pre-production phase as far as TV shows featuring those 2 characters, which is a pity, as they were more interesting than the Hulk in the movies. Marvel's other attempts have been complete and total disasters. Captain America, Spider-Man, and Doctor Strange have all made ill-fated forays on television. They've been planning a Silver Surfer movie for 15 years and a Spider-Man movie for 10 with nothing even resembling success. And movies of both Captain America and the Punisher have been made, but have had no luck in seeing a theater. Present scuttlebutt indicates they will be released directly onto video. However, the best comic-related movie for my money was Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles. Kevin Eastman and Peter Laird's independent comic has grown into an egregious marketing glut, but last February's movie was absolutely delightful. In fact, it made a better comic than the actual comic book. Like Dick Tracy, this movie acknowledged the inherent absurdity of the superhero premise, something even superhero comics themselves have started to lose sight of. There are other examples as well. R. Crumb's Underground comic, Fritz the Cat, was made into an animated movie, which Crumb later washed his hands of. A live version of Popeye was made, starring Robin Williams and Shelley Duvall, which was a total flop. Jules Pfeiffer's script stayed very close to E.C. Seeger's original comic strip, but it just didn't work on the screen. And a TV series based on Mike Grell's John Sable Freelance came and went about a year ago. A lot of these things are available on videocassette, including those Old Republic movie serials. You may want to check them out. This week's Comic in Review is not a comic in review at all, but in fact a videotape about comic books. It is called Comic Book Collector, hosted by Frank Gorshin and produced by Blue Flame Products Incorporated. This video is intended to introduce the viewer to the comic book world. It includes a history of the comic book, which is very well done if incomplete. The years covering World War II and 1965 to 1980 are basically left out. One thing this video manages to do is give proper credit where it is due. For example, it acknowledges the influence of underground and non-mainstream publishers on the present trend towards maturity and sophistication of comic books. It also gives Jack Kirby and Steve Ditko co-creator credit on early Marvel comic books with Stan Lee, something that is long overdue. The video includes quotes from comics from everyone from Steve Ditko to Eleanor Roosevelt, plus some good tips on preserving your collection and cutesy little comic book spotlights. The only major fault with this video is the insertion of a music video of sorts. It has this tedious, lengthy, Pink Floyd-esque song dubbed over a whole mess of Marvel and DC comics, and it absolutely destroys the rhythm of the presentation. However, Gorshin is an excellent narrator, as long as the script doesn't call for him to make an ass of himself, as it does periodically. And there are also some nice interviews with Mad publisher William Gaines, Mouse author Art Spiegelman, a few comic shop owners, and a bunch of others. It is basically a good intro to collecting, as well as a nice historical document. Comic Book Collector is distributed by Best Film and Video Corporation. The address is 98 Cutter Mill Road, Great Neck, New York, 11021. Or you can just call them at 1-800-527-2189. The video costs $19.99 and may also be available at your local video store. That's it for Comic Art Commentary this week. Having covered comics on screen, next time I will be taking a look at books on comics, plus a review of Benoit Piter's and Francois Chuiten's Fever in Urbicand graphic novel.
Can I ask you a question?
You can ask me any question you want.
I've been meaning to ask you this for a very long time.
I may even answer the question if you're good.
Oh, this is good.
Yes.
Don't take this the wrong way, dude.
Okay.
But how come you always review comic books that people just can't afford?
What do you mean can't afford?
You had some big doozies there.
Videotapes usually cost $20.
I'm talking about the comic books, kid.
All right, I promise. Not next week because I already have that figured out, and that's a little expensive because it's a graphic novel. But I promise I will review something that costs less than $2 in the near future.
You will?
I promise.
I'll hold you to that.
Okay.
Good. You may continue.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
She's so good to me.
I know.
When one thinks of the grand old masters of science fiction, most of the names that come up are just that, masters. Very few mistresses. Robert A. Heinlein, Isaac Asimov, H.G. Wells, Hal Clement, Edgar Rice Burroughs, hardly a woman in the bunch. So male-dominated was the field that Alice Sheldon spent her entire career writing under the name James Tiptree Jr. and not revealing her true identity until very late in life. With the women's movement in the late 1960s and early 1970s came the first wave of 20th century women to write science fiction and fantasy. Ursula K. Le Guin, Joanna Russ, Marion Zimmer Bradley, Kate Wilhelm, Anne McCaffrey, and others. Now women writers are ubiquitous. New York's women's bookstore, Judith's Room, has a very significant section of women's F&SF, and any bookstore will have these authors alongside the men. Vonda N. McIntyre, Joan Slonchowski, Diane Duane, Margaret Wander Bonanno, C.J. Cherry, Barbara Hambly, Ellen Kushner, Joan D. Vinci, and others. One also does not associate any of the grand old masters with strong female characters, or indeed any female characters with anything like depth. With women writers came women characters that actually had some dimension to them, such as the healer in McIntyre's Dream Snake, Starhawk in Hambly's books, and the many women, especially Morgan and Guinevere, in Zimmer Bradley's classic Arthurian tale, The Mists of Avalon. With Judy and I to discuss women in many aspects of women in fantasy and science fiction are Susan Shwartz, a Nebula and Philip K. Dick Award nominee, author of a dozen books, over 30 short stories, and numerous articles and reviews on science fiction. Jim Frenkel, editor, publisher, and packager of science fiction, who's worked with many of the women I just mentioned, and is currently a consultant for both Tor and Macmillan Books. And Alice Dowd, the selector of science fiction for the New York Public Library. A lot of the grand old masters that I mentioned tended only to speculate on technological or physical changes that humanity would go through in the future. Very often, gender roles were exactly the same as when the author was writing. For example, Alfred Bester's The Demolished Man, I not only had the same sex roles as 1950s America, but the same race roles. Susan, how do you think that the proliferation of women SF writers has changed that tendency?
Well, the first thing is I think it made Andre Norton, the only female Grandmaster, very, very happy to see so many spiritual descendants of hers. I like to think that we've added more variety and perhaps a leaven in the science fiction dough. I know I certainly try, and I know my colleagues try, too.
And do you guys have any particular thoughts on that?
I think, first of all, that women were there before the 60s. I mean,
Yes.
Andre Norton's been writing since 1939, and C.L. Moore, though she couldn't write under her own name because she would have been fired from her job at a bank, was writing from the 30s on, too, and so were people like Lee Brackett, who you couldn't tell if that was a man or a woman. But, you know, it really has created a lot of opportunities for people to write about anything in science fiction. Science fiction is like an alternate universe to our own in which you can write about anything, social issues, political issues, gender, sex issues, you know, technological issues, issues about change, sanity, you know, you name it. You can write about it in science fiction, and frequently with more perceptivity and freedom than in other genres.
What do you think? Something that was brought up, I noticed in a book I read recently, a criticism on science fiction, was that a lot of modern authors especially women authors, according to this writer, I forget who it was, said there isn't as much science in science fiction. Like Robert Heinlein had a lot of science in his science fiction. God knows Isaac Asimov has a lot of science in his science fiction. You don't see it as much in someone like Ursula Le Guin or
Careful now.
or someone like that, who doesn't have a scientific background either.
There's science and engineering. I mean, you know, Larry Niven doesn't have a scientific background, but he's considered a very hard science fiction writer.
Sure.
Joan D. Vinci doesn't have a scientific background, but she's a very hard science fiction writer, even though there are many men who insist that women cannot constitutionally write hard science fiction. Most of the people who say this are men who are trying to write hard science fiction.
This author I mentioned was a man.
Doesn't James Frenkel teach biology out in Ohio?
Yes, well, the fact is that many women have scientific backgrounds much more than they did before, simply because of feminism, and reading science fiction has opened women's eyes to science more, and math, and women are doing things that they weren't supposed to do years ago. You know, lots of them have real good hard science backgrounds. You know, in physics, engineering, chemistry, biology, mathematics, you name it.
Something we talked about recently on the Rift was cover art, and you, Jim, brought a few books along, and how the cover looks, and a lot of covers don't treat women right, so to speak. And you brought some covers along, if you want to talk about them.
Well, the book covers that I brought just show a lot of different ways of the way women have been represented in science fiction. The first cover is an Andre Norton book that shows, excuse me, a woman as a kind of a non-sex object. You know, she's not a person, but she's not a sex object either. The next two covers are of two covers of the same book, The Snow Queen, one of which has a rather nice portrayal of the protagonist of the book. The other one, which is a British version of the cover, has nothing but TNA.
It's not even accurate to the book.
No, it's not accurate at all. But it exploits TNA, and so you can see, you know, I mean, there are 3 big points on that book, and none of them have anything to do with the book. And the last set of covers are two different treatments of the same book. First, the large one was the hardcover edition, which is a very pastoral sort of soft science approach, and the second one, which is the mass market approach, has a woman as a technological person, a person in space doing something. It was very interesting that when the mass market cover was commissioned, the art director looked at the woman holding a lever like this and said, "God, it looks like she's going to kill somebody with a knife." No one else thought this except this male chauvinist art director, but it stayed as it is, and it showed a woman in a technological role. And what people want to read when they read about science fiction is science fiction, and this was an appropriate cover. Just happened to have a woman at the center of it. And roles have changed. It used to be that women were going in the back of the spaceship to get coffee, or going, you know, or being held by the alien while the manly man went to rescue her, you know. But it's changed. Women can do everything, as is true in today's society.
Mm-hmm. Susan, you're a woman in science fiction, so you started. I mean, how do you feel about what he said exactly, that women can do anything? Do you feel that's true?
Jim has been my editor. I think he's a great editor, and I think what he's saying is absolutely true. I don't myself have a science background. What I have is the ability to research and to interview scientists and make sure that when I do physics, it's right. When I do anthropology, it's right. When I do bioanthropology, I try to get it as right as I can. And still I will get told, oh yes, this is a nice lady with a PhD in English. What is she doing writing military science fiction? What I'm doing is getting nominated for the Philip K. Dick Award.
Right.
I think what Jim is saying is very definitely true. There have always been women writing it. By the way, I work for a securities firm, and I write under my own name. And that much has changed.
You don't have to worry about losing your job.
No, I don't think so. Not for that reason. And I think it's a marvelous genre for anybody to be writing in because, as Jim says, you can really write about anything, and you can confront, really, I think, what are the chief ethical issues of the 20th century in a way where you're not really preaching. That is, if you're doing it right, you're not preaching.
I wanted to ask you, Alice, do you find in the libraries that they put any constraints on you in buying science fiction according to issues? Do they say you can't do that, or?
No, I am fortunate in that I have total control over what I buy. You know, nobody tells me anything. I have a good time with it, and I look upon it more as speculative fiction. I really buy more than just science fiction, and I've been finding in the stores that they're ranging out into many different areas, and I think the women have sort of expanded science fiction to, I should say, too many areas. Mm-hmm. And when you were talking, the first book that I thought of was Elizabeth Ann Scarborough's Vietnam book, The Hero's War. I mean, I picked that up as science fiction, not understanding, didn't think what it was. I figured it'd be technology and fighting and all this, and I was just blown away when I read it. To me, that was the first real vision of Vietnam that I saw in a book, you know, as opposed to reading, you know, battle books or anything like that. And she did such a wonderful job of it, you know, so I really enjoyed that very much. And I see that influence very much. I mean, I was talking before about the New Age books I buy. I'm even finding all those concepts coming into science fiction books because I have a lot of fun when I buy. I get to look at them, you know, look through them, and choose, but I don't choose. I literally just buy everything. I will buy TNA. I don't care. If the worse the cover, I'll buy it. Because,
really?
You know, the library is a historical institution. We've got to record everything. So if nothing else, we've got the history of the growth of science fiction, speculative fiction there. Not in full color, unfortunately. We've had to microfilm it, but you know, it's really a fascinating job, and I love it, and and I get to read it, and I enjoy reading. I really got the job because I like reading science fiction. So I really don't have any science background myself. I really don't even have a literary background, just a college degree. But so it has expanded my horizons very much.
I think that's true of all of us in the field. You know, you get into it because you love to read. Of course, what do you get to read now? You get to read what you have to read.
Right.
You know, so sometimes that's good if you're doing good books. It's great for me.
I mentioned in the introduction characters. Just as an example, some have complained. You mentioned to me once that Joan Vinge was ambivalent about the way Robert Heinlein treated women in his books.
Right.
And
well, there's something called the Heinlein Woman. So it's a woman who is as competent and as capable as any man, and yet would rather fetch his pipe and slippers than be the empress of the galaxy. Really, I mean, that's the Heinlein Woman. She's subservient to her man, even though she's better than he is. It's kind of a wild notion. It's like that Cosmo girl. You know, I'm completely self-sufficient. I am wonderful. I am great. And boy, how do I get a man? You know, I mean, it's well, for his time, Heinlein was very liberated. You know, which now people who believe in feminist principles, which I think every thinking person should, because it's, you know, what's good for women is good for men. It's good for everybody. You know, nobody loses if everybody's doing all right. But for that time, Heinlein was way ahead. It's just that he outlived his time. Yeah.
So you're saying his work is dated, or?
It's dated in his treatment of women. Well, unfortunately, see, we live in a society that's layered. I mean, you know, with people living much, much longer today, you have a lot of people alive who were around before there was such a thing as feminism. And you also have people around who are mature adults now who are post-feminist, who think that feminism is somehow a dirty word. I mean, I meet these 20, 25-year-old women who think that if they're feminists, they're lesbians, which is wrong. You know, my wife is a feminist. My wife is not a lesbian, really, you know.
Yeah, I got that a lot. I minored in women's studies in college, so I got to take a number of courses like that. And one of the things I kept hearing was, "I'm not a feminist, but," and then they would say something that was stridently feminist.
I am not only a feminist, I am a liberal. I will claim the L word.
And the F word.
Oh, yes.
Yes.
Yeah. I've discovered that I'm a feminist and didn't know it. Yeah.
Well, I think that's true of a lot of people. You know, if you like the idea of equal wages, if you like the idea of not having to do things just because you know your body is made a certain way, then you're a feminist.
All it takes is one stupid remark, and you find out how feminist you are.
That's right. That's right.
You're working now on a book on Arthurian legend.
Uh-huh.
Out of morbid curiosity, is Marion Zimmer Bradley's book, The Mists of Avalon, having any effect, any more than any other book? I mean,
I did the old French research for Marion Zimmer Bradley's Mists of Avalon. Marion bought my first published story. So, to a certain extent, I owe Marion a debt of gratitude lifelong. But God's Spies is like Mists, only in it centers on a strong female character who is a bit of a magician and a lot of an outlaw, Kundry from Wagner's Parsifal. She's a sorceress. She's sent back in time to relive the action that sentenced her to wander the earth until she could be redeemed. She laughed at the crucifixion. It was an interesting technical problem in terms of research to write that. It's an interesting technical problem to write a book set around an opera. It's a lot of fun. One of these days, real soon now, it ought to be scheduled. I'm now doing a Chinese fantasy in collaboration with Andre Norton. And then I think I want to do some science fiction. I want to write a novel about Wall Street, maybe. Or would you call that horror fiction? Do what called Frozen Assets and have it be about cryogenics or something like that.
Sounds like Ramsey Campbell.
It's pretty thick.
Horror. Wall Street is horror.
No fooling. The people on the trading floor really like the idea, though. They're sick.
I imagine.
I was going to say before, you were talking about, when we were talking about being able to tackle issues in the 50s, when McCarthy was keeping the lid on discussion of a lot of things in this country, and everyone was terrified to talk about, repressive government, because McCarthy would put you in jail for it, basically. Science fiction writers were writing stuff that was about this exactly, except instead of talking about repressive United States government, they would talk about repressive government on some planet, and to talk about racial issues instead of talking about the whites dominating the blacks, they would talk about the green and the purple. I mean, they were just get around this by cloaking it in science fiction disguise, but that no longer happens. Now people will tackle anything. It's just come a little further out of the closet. And that goes for racial, sexual, and all sorts of roles. Household roles.
Well, I'd like to thank you all for being on the show, and it's been wonderful, but we've run out of time, unfortunately.
Happens to every week, the same thing
Every
happens.
week
It's
it
amazing.
happens.
It's like clockwork.
Ooh.
Sorry.
But what I'd like to say is next week we're going to deal with what's next with the next generation. And we're going to have, among others, Robert Greenberger, an editor for DC Comics. And, Keith, you and I make a pretty good team.
I think so, yeah.
Beauty and the Beast.
Yeah,
Everyone calls you Beast.
How did I know you were going to say that?
I'm too quick for you. Good night.
See you next time.